Hi, this is Kim Wright. I hope you enjoyed City of Darkness. I'm here today with my daughter, who's this disembodied voice who's going to ask me some questions for our little talk about City of Darkness. So when you hear a voice, you're not hallucinating, it's my daughter Lee. So, okay, Lee, hit me with the first question about City of Darkness.
What makes the Ripper case so fascinating?
Well, the reason it fascinates me, I think the reason it's fascinating the world is because he was never caught. It's like one of the great unsolved cases of all time. And it's always kind of personally fascinated me because when you start studying it, and I've always been interested in forensics, like the CSI shows on TV and stuff, but this is like CSI, the unbelievably early years. What they didn't have fingerprinting, they didn't have blood typing, they had basically none of the things that we consider forensics. They didn't have them. So the Jack the Ripper case is when things kind of switched from being about why was the person murdered into how was the person murdered. Jack the Ripper was probably the first modern criminal, and by modern I mean he killed people he didn't know, and he killed people for no apparent reason. And before that, usually if someone showed up unfortunately dead, you'd look to the spurned lover, or you'd look to the son who was eager to inherit before his time. You look to the neighbor he had had some kind of conflict with. In other words, there would be a reason, there would be a why that the person was killed. There was no why for why Jack the Ripper chose these 5 particular women and killed them. So they had to catch him, not through normal Sherlock Holmes, put your pipe in your mouth deduction, but through the how of forensics. That's what makes it fascinating to me. It was the start of kind of solving crimes in the way we think of people solving crimes now. This was the first case.
Why did you decide to mix real characters with fictional ones?
Well, there were some really interesting real characters of that era. You're talking about Victorian England, and Victoria was connected to almost everybody famous in all of Europe. She had so many children and grandchildren, they scattered to every corner of Europe, that I was able to bring in Queen Victoria as a real character and kind of the unofficial sponsor of the unit. And one of the really kind of interesting things about Victoria in real life is she was interested in crime. I don't think the image of Victoria actually does her justice. She was very smart, very shrewd, and she kind of had a little bit of a darkness in her that made her inclined towards interest in crime. And she wrote Scotland Yard letters all the time. Now, one can only imagine how thrilled Scotland Yard was to receive those letters, but of course they took them seriously because she was the queen. So it was an easy step for me to imagine that Queen Victoria, when writing these letters to Scotland Yard, which really happened, that some of them would fall into the hands of my fictional detective, Trevor Wells. So that's where the idea of mixing the real and the fictional kind of first came to me. And then once Victoria was in the mix of characters, it was easy to find ways that other famous people would gradually be kind of drawn into the stories. Throughout the series of 8, they're going to meet a lot of famous people.
Since the case was never solved, how did you decide who to name as the Ripper?
Well, that's the tricky part, isn't it? In real life, the case was not solved, but there are actually people who've devoted their entire careers to studying this, called Ripperologists. Can you imagine your incredible pride if your son and daughter come back from college and say, I'm going to be a Ripperologist, Mom? But the person that I chose as the killer is one of the candidates that is treated pretty seriously. I'd say he's in the top 5 as a possibility for Jack the Ripper. I studied all of them. I thought he was the one I could tell the most interesting story about, and so that's why I went with him as the Ripper.
Did they really think the Ripper might be royal?
Yes. There were several things about the Ripper killings that were very odd. You always imagine, in this death by a knife in a dark alley, that it's just like some slashing, it's just some kind of carnage. The Ripper knife work was very neat, and so it was believed that he was not only a gentleman, but there was a pretty big school of thought that he must have been a doctor. He drained blood from the bodies. He did things that would be very difficult for someone without medical knowledge to do, and he did them fast, and he did them in the dark. So there was a big school of thought he was a doctor. There was also a pretty big school of thought that he might have been Victoria's grandson, that Victoria's oldest son's oldest son was really known for going into the East End for various pleasures. He was quite the playboy of his time. and he was actually considered a suspect. He was quite near some of the places where the crimes happened. So yeah, they were considering everybody from like dock workers right on up to Victoria's grandson.
People in this unit are outsiders. Why did you decide to bring together this specific group?
Well, I thought that might be fun. Forensics was an outside science. Scotland Yard went to forensics after this, but they went to forensics kind of reluctantly. They liked the old school deduction. They liked the Sherlock Holmes in the smoky room type stuff. So they had to be kind of pulled kicking and screaming towards the area of forensics. So I started thinking, who would be the people that would be interested in doing this? And it would be the outsiders. So my main characters, they're all definitely outsiders in their way. Geraldine and Emma are women. That means nobody's going to take, in that era, their opinion seriously about anything. Davy is working class. He's got a Cockney accent. Rayleigh Abrams is exactly the kind of person you would imagine a detective to be. Very shrewd, great memory and all that stuff, but he's Jewish, which makes him an outsider at Scotland Yard. And then there's Trevor Wells, who probably had, and there's Tom. Tom was from a titled family, but he's still in medical school. He's a boy. He's 20. No one's going to take him seriously as a coroner when he hasn't even finished his medical training. So they've all got something against them, except for Trevor, who is at least adult, white, male, trained detective, Christian background, all that. But Trevor's an outsider just because of his personality. He has a lot of trouble sucking up to his superiors. He's kind of blunt. He's kind of clumsy. So I thought this group would pull together. There are a bunch of outsiders that are putting forth outside theories. And so I love imagining them in their tiny room at the bottom of the stairs at Scotland Yard, badly lit. They've got a table. They don't have much, and they're trying to solve these crimes.
Will they continue as characters?
Yes. I really love my characters, and they all continue through the next books. Leanna and John, who play in their whole family, Cecil and William and their mother, they play a role that will be bigger in some books and smaller in other books. But the classic characters, Trevor, Rayleigh, Geraldine, Emma, and Tom, my big five, go through all the books. I kind of enjoy in different books making different ones of them dominant. I kind of think when I start the book, okay, this is Emma's story. Okay, Davy's going to play a big role in this. So they kind of take turns in some ways being the lead, but those five will go continuously through. And I really like books. I like series that do that. My two favorite mystery writers are Elizabeth George and Ruth Rendell, and they both do that. They have recurring characters who come back time after time. So you get to also kind of trace the character's evolution as they change as people, while you're also got a crime a book.
Who is your favorite character?
Well, I mean, you never ask an author that because it really is like the classic, who's your favorite child. But I really like Geraldine, and I think most people do. Geraldine Bainbridge is a very unlikely sleuth. She's a society woman. She is Trevor's confidant. He goes to her house for dinner. She takes them in. She provides them a place to kind of, play their Thursday night murder games, which is Trevor's effort to try and train all of them in forensics. She provides the house, the food, the servants, the money when they travel. They're shortly in the next books are all going to be set in different cities. They'll be going to Paris, and they'll be going to Bombay, and they'll be going to St. Petersburg. They'll be going all over the world. Sometimes at the behest of the Queen, and sometimes because circumstances demand it. And Geraldine's the money. She says herself, I'm the money. And so Trevor's like, so you're always welcome. So she's their kind of unofficial sponsor. I also think she's hilarious. She's very forward-thinking for her time. She believes in votes for women. She's against some causes and very passionately in favor of others. So she's just a fun character. She's also, though, very shrewd. Like a lot of society people, she's used to sitting at a dinner party and deducing things. So she's also their ticket into a world that they might not have been able to get into otherwise.
How did you do your research?
Well, research is, I feel like as a writer, I'm very lucky. I live in a very lucky time because it's so easy to do research online. And I'm not sure I could have done this series, 25 years ago when it was so hard to find out this stuff. If I need to know, like if Tom is coming from school in Cambridge to London and he hops on the train and they're waiting for him, does that take hour and a half in 1888, or does it take all day? You're able to find out that kind of stuff online. Probably my greatest coup online is the third book, City of Silence, takes place in St. Petersburg, and they sail there on Victoria's yacht. Victoria comes with them on this trip because her granddaughter Alex is living in St. Petersburg. She's the married to the heir to the throne. And I was able to find online, and this still kind of stuns me, a complete diagram of Victoria's yacht in 1889 and the kind of meals they would serve. You found like the menus for what was served, the color schemes for all of the rooms. So when I put them on the yacht, I can put them on the yacht with a lot of confidence. I've seen the floor plan of the yacht. I know what they ate. I know how many days it took to travel by small boat from London to St. Petersburg. I know that Victoria wouldn't let them lower the flag when she left because she thought it made the people of London hysterical to know the Queen was not there. So they continued to fly her flag, her standard, so that they would believe the Queen is in residence. Little details like that make the story a lot more interesting. And there's a book called Everyday Life in Victorian Times that was incredibly helpful because it helps with all the other little details that you don't think about, like you could tell a woman was a lady if her dress buttoned up the back, because it meant she had a servant who could button her into her dress. And you could tell someone was not of that class if her dress buttoned down the front, because that meant she dressed herself. Little details like that, I think, really make a book a lot more interesting and make it feel more real to the reader.
Did you go anywhere in person to do any research?
Oh yeah, actually, I really love London. It's one of my favorite cities. And years ago, many, many years ago, I took one of those Jack the Ripper tours, which I would advise that. I would advise you go in a group. They're really pretty terrifying. You meet at a pub at about 10 o'clock at night and you visit the 5 places where the 5 women were slaughtered, and then you also visit some places where Jack could have, like you visit some people think he was literally a butcher, like he literally worked at a slaughterhouse. So you go to a Victorian slaughterhouse at midnight. You can imagine it's quite the thing to visit. But you also go to the home where the royals would have been. So those tours are a lot of fun. That was great.
Some of your characters are real, others imagined. Some of the events are real and others imagined. Is there a danger in mixing fact and fiction?
That was one of the things that worried me, because if you've got a book and it's partially true and it's partially not true, how do you mix that together? A lot of historical writers kind of struggle with that balance. And historical mystery writers, I think, struggle a little bit more because the events of the crime, you usually need to keep them pure. Some of my crimes are real. Jack the Ripper obviously was, and some of my crimes were invented. So I basically wanted to add the fictional element so that I could imagine what my characters were thinking and feeling. And then you can do things like you can add a love story, which I think gives a lot of interest. There's several love stories in this series. There's not only Leanna and John, but there's going to be down the road Emma and Tom and Emma and Trevor, and that's going to create some interesting dynamics in the group. And like I said, with Elizabeth George and Ruth Rendell, you want the private lives of the characters to continue to be interesting. Oh, and Davy has a love affair. Oh, so does Rayleigh. They all fall in love. How could you not? They're traveling the world to exotic places. So you could add fun things like that. The mix of the real and the fictional, I tried to solve by having a segment at the end of each book where I say what's real. And I tell which facts I researched and did not change, and everything else is fictional.
What's next?
What's next is, not surprisingly, after City of Darkness, City of Light. It's already been set up. Rayleigh has been sent, as we all know, to Paris to study forensics with the French. And while he's there, he's going to stumble upon a crime. And Paris at that time is a very exciting place to be because it's 1889. They're doing the Exposition Universal, which is a huge World's Fair. And the centerpiece of that World's Fair is the Eiffel Tower. So when Rayleigh arrives, it's half built. They're scrambling to get it finished by the first day of the World's Fair. Gustave Eiffel is a major character in the book. All the people that have come for the pavilions and the parties and all that stuff, Annie Oakley's there, Paul Gauguin. There's a lot of famous people flooding to Paris for this World's Fair, and they're racing to finish the tower. Rayleigh stumbles upon a crime, is sending Trevor information about it. He and Trevor are kind of trying to solve the crime via wire, and then Rayleigh goes missing. And of course, when Rayleigh disappears, they all jump on a boat and go to Paris to find Rayleigh before it's too late. So the next book is City of Light, and it is also up on Amazon, available for in ebook and paperback. So I hope if you enjoy City of Darkness, you'll give that a shot. This is Rayleigh's chance to shine a little bit.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.